great reflection on the wonderful people who have agreed to be our speakers. First of all, I would like to thank the Junior League. They give us this great space to meet in. And then I would really like to thank our 5 speakers who are giving of their time and their talent to make this wonderful class possible. And tonight you're going to hear from Simon Herbert, who's going to get a much better introduction from June West. So to Mark Weaver and to Suzanne Askew and to John Griffin and to Jim Lutz, our gratitude for everything that you are about to do. June?
Thank you, Sally. Welcome, everybody. I know it's packed sardine time. We took advantage of the fact that so many people wanted to take the class. We stopped at first at 24, then we stopped it at 40, then we stopped it at 50, and then they said, yeah, we think we can get 60 in there, so we apologize for the time spaces. But, I mean, you know, it's either make people mad on the other end that can't get in, or, not mad, but you know, I mean frustrated, and then, or either have you with tight quarters here. So I personally apologize, and this is wonderful though, it's great, and it means that we'll go find a bigger house when we do this next year. And I just want to say thank you to the Education Committee for working diligently on coordinating the efforts of our preservation series, which we do annually. We did want to let you know we are videotaping this program, not for circulation, but for those of your friends, perhaps, that could not come tonight. Either they paid for the class and couldn't make it to the first class, come on in. Or someone who you think might be interested in the class. We're planning on having some real fun parties at the arcade, and we'll have popcorn and big screen TV. And we won't have the real thing to ask questions of, but we'll move from there, but I think it'll be a lot of fun. So also I put a board out front about Memphis Heritage and some other information of items and things that are going on. But again, I'm just very grateful to be a part of Memphis Heritage. I'm very grateful for you to have taken this opportunity to take the series. And I'm not going to take too much time to introduce this dear friend of ours. Simon, I met Simon years ago when he was teaching at Belmont Technical College in Ohio in a building trades program that I first got to visit. And I've had a great passion for old houses, but when I saw students literally hands-on working on houses that were built in the 1800s and learning from the ground up and watching the work that Simon did and the other teachers at that school, I was very, very pleased when I got this call from Simon about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. How long have you been in office?
4 years.
4 years ago, saying, guess where I am? Helena. And so I was I'm from Arkansas, so I was real proud that Arkansas had started a building trades program for historic preservation in Helena, and I was very, very grateful that my friend Simon was heading that part of the university up. Unfortunately, Simon will be leaving this area of the country in the near future, so I took advantage of him as many times as I could when he was here locally. He helped us judge the Preservation Awards last year, and he has graciously been willing to put this program together on bungalows and 4 squares, the history of that. Simon comes from, I'll let him tell you where he comes from, but I love, my favorite statement is that when you hear him speak, you'll know that when people say, where are you from? And he says, Helena. You'll get an idea. Simon is a dear friend, a dear person, and a very, very talented professor. And I'm sorry he's not going to be in our area of the country, but we will be getting him back here from time to time, whether he knows it yet or not. But Simon is presently at the Preservation Trades Program at the University of Arkansas in Helena. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Simon.
Okay, thank you. One thing June didn't tell you, and that at the end of this session there's an 80 question and answer. You cannot leave until you've successfully completed it. Couple of logistical things. I need to stand behind the projector, so I will be sort of back there, but I would like to encourage you to ask questions during this presentation. One of the reasons is that I ain't going back. This is going forward to the end, and if you have questions and something catches your attention, or you want to bring up a point of discussion, please do so. don't need to raise your hands, just call out. And with that, we'll see if the technology that worked in Helena works in Memphis.
Can I mention one quick thing? Your card mentioned, it said the 24th of March. Don't be messed up, that was my mistake. It's every Monday in March, so don't go by the card, go by the Mondays. Thank you.
Okay, and we can do the lights.
Can you turn around? 50%, not all the way down. 50%.
We've got it all first.
Oh, you've got.
Yep, the light switches are back in. Down a little more, I think. Okay. That way, if any of you fall asleep, we'll spot you right away. The evolution of style. This is always a conundrum for architects, historians, and academics, because trying to decipher where some architectural styles come from is rather like discovering a long-lost relative, and you have to trace back through their bloodline. And along the way, you find that they may have some very murky and mysterious past, and you're not quite sure how they got to be who they were. And that's certainly the case with the Foursquare, a certain style of building that was prevalent from around 1900 to 1935. Its peak period was really quite short. It really started to sputter around 1920. And it only got the name Foursquare in the 1980s. It's as if this thing sat out there, undiscovered, with a style all of its own, and somebody eventually realized that these things are all over the place. We better put a name to them. And because most of them were square, they got the name Foursquares. What are the roots of the Foursquare? Well, it took some digging, but the general consensus appears to be that they are related to the prairie style of house. The Prairie School, which gave rise to the prairie style, began in Chicago with a group of architects including Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright, and others. And they evolved 9 principles of design. And among those 9 principles were that there had to be a unity of design, that there was not going to be a hodgepodge of styles. Remember that 1893, which was when the prairie style began, what styles were prevalent in America? Think of Memphis. What styles were really being utilized at that time? Victorian. And of the Victorian styles, which would have been at the latter end of the 1800s? Queen Anne. Think of Queen Anne, think of towers, asymmetrical designs, a lot of columns, decoration, color, a lot of stuff all on one building. The Prairie School really wanted to rationalize what was going on with a house. And that's why they set about coming up with these principles of design. Along with integration of the design from exterior to interior to the furnishings, they wanted integration with the site. That means that there is a relationship between the building and the ground that it sits on. It isn't a design that's simply pulled out of a hat and plopped onto a piece of land, rather like a subdivision. They looked for a less boxy floor plan, something that flowed. It wasn't a relationship of little boxes stacked one next to the other. The first floor was going to be raised and was not to have a basement. They wanted people to be elevated so they could see the neighborhood, see the landscape around them. And it was designed simply for mass production. This means that the components had to be simplified to the point where all of the parts could be easily produced in a number of places and brought together to make the house. The furnishings were going to be integrated. It wasn't going to be an empty space that somebody came in afterwards and said, well, I think we'll put one of these over here and one of those over here, and what about pink on the walls? No. And to underline that, they said, no decorators. Okay, any of you are interior designers or decorators? Okay. Nobody's raising their hands, so okay. Well, you probably would have a hard time getting a job on a prairie school design if you were a decorator, because the architects wanted to take charge of that design from beginning to end, from the exterior to the interior, from the building to the landscaping, to the fixtures, even down to the light fixtures. So they really saw this as a total design, not as, I'm the architect, I'm just going to produce a house for you, and now you finish it off the way you want to. They were taking charge. The four-square is then a vernacular derivative of the prairie style. And there's a little drawing of what a typical four-square building would look like. Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Winslow House in 1893, and this really marks the start of the prairie style. Now, we talked about Queen Anne style and how exuberant the design was, and in marked contrast, how plain and simple the prairie style was. The horizontality of the building is emphasized by the belt course that runs around, in addition to the second story, marked in a darker, different material, and the hip roof, which has a huge overhanging eave. And these are some of the distinctive features of the prairie style house. This was also Wright's first independent commission outside of working for others. 1906 to 9, he designed and what the Roby House was built in Chicago, and this even takes further the idea of the horizontal. The idea of a prairie design was uniquely American, and of course made reference to the extensive flatlands and grasslands in the Midwest. It was an architecture designed for big, expansive, open spaces. Note the line of windows in a panel that allow the viewer to look out in an almost uninterrupted view. There are places for plantings, and these low walls again emphasize the squat and drawn out nature of the building. The roofs are extremely large in their overhang and are echoed in the second story window up here, and again further back and further back still. Other examples of the prairie style. The top left is by Wright, and the two others are by his contemporaries. And you can see that there is quite a difference in individual style. What I find interesting is the one on the lower left, which is more like a shoebox and has an addition bump out here, and you still have the marked belt course up at the top with slight decorative embellishments here, but they're embellishments to help accentuate the horizontal style of the building. So what are the defining characteristics of the four-square? Well, basically it is a square box, and it's designed to be used on an urban or suburban lot. It has a low-pitched roof, which is usually hipped, and contains one or more dormers. The eaves are overhanging, which helps to accentuate the horizontal nature of the house again. It's 2 stories and will have 1 or 2 wings or porches. And there are numerous stylistic details that can be applied to the basic box. it's not just going to be prairie, but here are two examples. The first one being in Helena, Arkansas, which has a number of four squares. This is in brick, which has been painted. Here is a side piece, and also one at the front, and unusual, a place where you can drive your car and park it. The automobiles were becoming very fashionable by this time, and houses were being designed to reflect that. And Wright was very quick in the prairie style to include design for the automobile. Out of the Architectural Economy, advertisement of 1920, this shows a four-square with stucco cladding. And what I'm going to do is try and highlight some of the design features in the tiny little plans down here. But on the first floor, you've got an offset stairway leading to the porch into an open living room, dining room and kitchen over here on the first floor. Very simple design layout. If you break it into four little cubes, that's basically the floor plan of a four square with a lot of variations. Some of those squares, of course, have been made into one oblong, and the stairs, in this case, flow up here to the second floor where they have bathroom and 4 bedrooms with built-in closets. At the time, these were modern and very appealing houses for middle class and well-to-do people. And I'm trying to get this to go forward. Please put your hands together and pray. Thank you. So another basic four square, however this one is in the arts and crafts style. The lower portion is in brick and the upper portion is probably wood shingles. The arts and crafts style was known for its use of natural materials and the reduction of a lot of fussiness, and in this case the little points of white are the rafter tails. So there were no eaves underneath, there were no fascia boards holding gutters. The rafter tails just hung right out there, as you'll see in some of the later slides as well. There's some embellishment to the chimneys, giving it some form and three-dimensionality. And over here you've got a little bump out that would have been where the stair went up. The stair would have made a turn at this point and allowed light to come in right at that point where people went up and down.
I think that's a remnant of the Chicago style window. For instance, it evolved from the Chicago.
I can't say that it did. I think with some further digging, it may be possible to assign it, but you'll find this particular feature in, for example, Queen Anne houses. But it was a nice way of breaking up the box a little bit, but they've kept with these horizontal lines, which breaks the material from brick to wood shingles. Here's another feature of the arts and crafts style, these wonderful tapered columns and a broad expanse without a support in the middle. Those buildings which were understructured when they were constructed, usually had to come back later and put in a support here and here. Raised up off the ground, and here you can see basement windows. So this was breaking with the pure design principles, but by this time the four square and the idea of the prairie style had somewhat dissolved in that you have a trickle-down effect. You don't have people being purists about style.
Does not having rain gutters create an appreciable amount of water damage to these types of structures?
Absolutely. Yes. If you do not have gutters on buildings, your water is going to run off the main roofs and can do a great amount of damage to all the materials through splashback, through pressure, water pressure and penetration. Eventually it will wreak havoc with a building. I'm going to switch controls and see if we can get this to work here.
I think you got the symbol at tops or something.
What is that symbol up there?
It's that maybe it came out, maybe if you restart your show, you know, just escape and then restart.
I think if we hit escape, we'll be doing just that.
It'll be lovely.
Yeah, you just come right back out of it.
There you go.
If somebody's an authority on symbols and is wishing to take full responsibility, pressing a button, please go ahead. Colonial style, Madison, New Jersey. Here we've added two-story bay windows on the side and the front, big dormers on the top, and a huge pediment with both round and square columns. And this was quite a thing with this house because they really piled on the goodies, so to speak. Okay. You, sir, are going to have to be paid extra for your... The idea of the Foursquare, as we now call it, was circulated widely through catalogs, through advertisements, in this case, the Sears and Roebuck catalog of 1919, and the Fullerton, shown on the right, you could get for a mere $2,200. I'm not sure what the Gladstone cost, probably a little more with these groups of columns, but you can see from the floor plans that they provided that you're still basically 4 rooms on the first floor and 4 rooms on the second with some changes. The doorways would be flipped, left and then right. Stairways in this one were at the back of the living room. Over here, it's immediately to the right of the front door. So people could choose the house that fitted their lifestyle, how they wanted to use the interior space. But almost always there is this wonderful and generous porch and entranceway that will give shelter to people entering the house and give a great spot for people to lounge and enjoy the above ground view from the house itself.
I have a question. Was this the first time, like around this era, when they really started advertising houses like this, like mass produced, or was it done in previous styles?
Not to the same extent. Now, bungalows and Foursquares both fall into this, as well as some other odd styles that probably haven't yet had a name put to them. But this was a period when mass production techniques were trying to keep up with the demand for houses. Sears had a huge plant in New Jersey, and they would ship whole houses on flat cars and in box cars all over the country. Wherever there was a rail line and a wagon to haul it off at the other end, these houses could be transported to a site and erected. So you could look through a Sears catalog and pick not only the house and the plan that you wanted, but all the stuff that went in it. You could pick light fixtures, toilet fixtures, doors, windows. It was really a case of doing your shopping for a house by mail. And imagine that you could do that today on the internet. You just go into a site, and somebody's bound to come up with it. Go into a website and build your house on the web and have it shipped to you, and somebody builds it at the other end. Well, this was happening around the turn of the century.
About how long did it take after you placed the order? Just kind of curious. It's a big order.
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for you.
About 9 months.
Yes.
they ship the materials and then they put them together on site.
Mhm.
So they would ship all the brick and then a bricklayer would come and put it together. Is that correct?
The craftsman would have to be arranged ahead of time, and all the pieces were numbered. I mean, individual bricks didn't have a number 5022, but the basic units would have a same number, and a stud, for example, would have the same number, and all you had to do was look around the plans and then match the number that you needed with the pile. And usually these came in banded groups of materials that were easily identifiable by when they were going to be needed in the building process. The people that would erect these buildings, I'm not sure how much training they had. Obviously they had to have some, because this was an entirely different building technique than the one they were probably used to, which is going and gathering the materials and cutting them to length. Mostly these buildings arrived in pre-cut lengths so that they could be very quickly and efficiently erected.
Yeah, every bungalow is basically a little different, in Memphis anyway.
I'm sorry?
And yet each bungalow in Memphis is a little bit different. And
Well,
some details, it's not homogeneous at all.
I don't think you're going to find any one building to be exactly the same as the other, whether it be a four-square or a bungalow. If you were to line them up, I think you'd notice which one was different in one way or another.
But it's interesting that you would bell there, but yet they would all be somewhat different.
Yeah, if any of you have read Old House Journal, there are sometimes articles in there about these plan houses, and somebody will say, oh, I have a Sears and Roebuck plan number 43, something like this, and somebody else will write in and say, I have a 43 as well. They'll compare pictures, but they look quite different because of either initial changes that were done at the design stage or changes that were done after the house was constructed.
Do they achieve integration with the site when they mass produce houses like this?
I think here you would almost have to have a flat lot in order to build. And this is one of the deviations from the pure prairie concept of integrating the house with the landscape. Obviously, you couldn't do that with this. If you were ordering from a catalog, you pretty much had to deal with the house that came to you. And you had to arrange for the land to fit the building. Obviously, if there was a slope, the foundation would have to be altered so that you had something level to build on.
This may be a dumb question, but the house, like this type plan, or just a built house, what would have been a better built house structurally? One that was pre-cut or one that was formed by a craftsman?
I can't say that there would be a real difference because these were engineered in a factory setting. They were produced under quite strict control, so that the materials coming in and the material going out on the rail car would have been monitored. I've been in Sears houses and the structures are absolutely wonderful, at least the ones I've seen. A lot of it has to do with the craftsmanship used to assemble the components. The material itself looked perfectly good. Okay, we're going to need to move on to the next slide. Okay. This brings us to our next style, bungalows. Bungalows have a very long history. I wasn't quite aware of how long it was until I did some digging, but 1676 is the time when the word bungalow is first used. Bungalows are still being produced today, but their real area of popularity was from the end of the 1900s to roughly 1930, 1940. That was its real area of popularity. Can we move on to the next one?
I thought the word was from India.
It certainly is. We're about to get to that. The British ruled India from the late 1700s until independence in 1947. And the Hindi word Bangla, first used in 1676, described the local house type that was used, and it means belonging to Bengal. That's all it means. By 1700s, the word had changed to Bangales, and because the British had trouble with native tongues, they changed the word to bungalow to make it more pronounceable. So the native bungalow was very simple and functional in design. Here we have a thatch roof, local material, sun-baked brick underneath with columns. The main roof overhangs this little colonnaded area and provides shade and shelter from tropical climate. This is a ladder going up on top. One presumes to service the thatch or to extinguish fires that came out of the chimney. In 1911, the father of Rudyard Kipling, J. Lockwood Kipling, compiled a document and described various government bungalows. And the government, the British government that is, used the local bungalow form extensively to produce very inexpensive buildings along highways, for rest stops, for checkpoints, and they housed offices as very functional buildings. The floor plans were adaptable. The openings often aligned, so in this case you have door, 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 out to the outside, and same this way, with a porch all the way around here, another porch there, and another porch here, so that airflow was increased.
Where's the kitchen?
Well, you have a pantry, and that's about it. They have the luxury of a bath and another bath, but I think it's safe to surmise that the quality of the bathroom in 1911 may have been quite different than what you would expect today. Another plan from the same document shows a different grouping of rooms, but still you have the airflow between the doors, the windows, and a nice elevation showing the raised up portion with these large doors that could be opened to provide ventilation. And right here you have a band of openings which in all likelihood were a series of clerestory windows that would also help to take out the hot air, so that you have a cycling of air coming through the building. British tea plantation bungalow, and this is a 1930s photograph, an extraordinary building. It does have thatch. Interestingly, the British banned thatch for use on buildings for a period of time, because in one of the early rebellions, the natives would throw torches onto thatched buildings occupied or used by the British, and so the British banned use of that material. But this apparently was either after that time or in a safe place. Very tall first floor with mostly open second floor with huge verandas on the second floor. Stairway going up, and I could almost bet you that this is bedding airing out. This was also called a bungalow, another part of India. It barely fits the forms we've just seen, but remember that the bungalow is more a concept than a single style of building. The concepts, which are listed in just a little while, are that you have this protected inner portion of the house, protected overhead from rain, and in this case, in between each of these sets of columns, hang shades to protect the inner part from the sunshine. So the British adopted the Indian bungalow design because no model existed for tropical buildings. They used time-tested local designs which worked much better than anything they could design at the time. They very quickly adopted the building model, and they could adapt the basic concept for a wide variety of individual design preferences. They used local labor, techniques, and materials in their construction, and they provided an ideal model for a retreat from the rigors of colonial life. Before I go on to the next slide, it's important to realize that although the British government were using the bungalow, first of all, for an official use, in that they would make these buildings quite quickly using materials and labor locally, it did hit a chord with many families who wanted a place far away from the hustle and bustle of colonial life. And they adapted this design for houses of retreat. Now on to the next slide, and you'll see what little retreat this is. Unknown date to this photograph, but a real whopper of a bungalow with everything. Can we go back to that 1 second?
Why would they go back to using thatch after them using a different material? Because it doesn't seem like that's the best material.
One thing about thatch is that if it's plentiful, it's also cheap. It's a natural material. It has a fairly good lifespan. And if people locally knew how to build with it, but didn't know how to build with another material, then it was natural that they would use that. If you're living far away and in a different perspective, you generally need to adopt to how people live locally, which is a good lesson for any colonial to remember. This one seems to have been embellished just a tad. These end walls of masonry have these little columns or pirouette items on here, and I can't tell you exactly what they were. They may be Indian in influence and source. Certainly I had never seen anything like this in my life until I saw this photograph. Open areas up here. This is a covered, or soon to be covered, stairway that comes down. Large porch, a porte cochere, so you could actually drive in a carriage or a motor car and discharge your passengers. Very unusual, almost ecclesiastical or Gothic archway here, and then the house continues on around and so on and so on. The geographical growth of the bungalow, of course, as we perceive it, started in India because that's where we got the name bungalow from. The design and the concept of the bungalow certainly reached in England as the colonials would come back for vacations or on leave. But the colonies took the idea and it reached into their other areas of colonization: Australia, New Zealand, Kenya, Malaya, Ceylon, other parts, Southeast Asia. Wherever the British trod, they usually put up some kind of bungalow building, either for official use or for their own. By the Centennial Exhibition in America of 1876, many of the ideas that had come to England were also crossing the Atlantic and ending up in America. And the Americans were adopting the bungalow also as a place to live. The earliest bungalow in Hawaii is about 1854. Both America and England, of course, had interest in the Caribbean, and so you'll find them in Bermuda, Jamaica, and the West Indies. Here's one in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. Wonderful photograph of a very interesting building. Apparently tile roof, very intricate fretwork running all the way around, and barge boards. A 2-story open gallery up here. I'm assuming this is an entranceway. this, we're sitting or viewing this from a hillside, and here's a patio at the upper level. Shutters on the windows and what appears to be no glass but bars for security. In a temperate climate, probably no need for glass. If any of you have lived in a climate like this, you'll know that it stays at a fairly constant temperature throughout the year. It just gets wet or a little bit wetter. No, they do have mosquitoes. A very similar style, but with differences. Here we have thatch, an open veranda that is screened at the top, stairway coming down to a security gate and steps down to the street level. It's possible that servants lived underneath while the residents lived above. This, I'm surmising, is a kind of breezeway or cupola that would allow the air to waft up through the house and then escape, while still providing protection from the weather. This is a 1901 English plan for a thatched bungalow, just to bring the thatch home a little bit. The English, of course, had constructed buildings with thatch for centuries, so this was not a new material to them. However, this is quite an eye-opener of a building. If we look at this little tiny plan up top, you can see an open porch up here. They would term that a veranda, and a little round room situated right here with a conical-shaped roof and an eyebrow window. Okay, some styles used eyebrow windows but were called other things. The arts and crafts movement shingle style employed eyebrow windows quite extensively. The bungalow has a relationship with the arts and crafts movement. The influences that are somewhat difficult to unravel, and I am surmising that the relationship is similar to the one I've developed here. The Great Exhibition of London in 1851 was one of the great high points of the Industrial Revolution. It showed what Britain could do. It highlighted not only the produce of an industrial nation, but the building itself was composed of mass-produced iron and glass, a revolutionary concept at the time. One thing it did herald, and that was a loss of craft skills. And this provided a philosophical reaction to what some people saw was going to be the end result of industrialization, and that was loss of people's ability to make things with their hands, loss of skill. John Ruskin, William Morris, and Charles Eastlake were all in the same bag, so to speak, philosophically. And William Morris probably appears as the most vocal proponent of a way to prevent the loss of those craft skills. This led to the forming of the arts and crafts movement in England. There are offshoots, of course, and the one over here, Art Nouveau, is the European equivalent of the arts and crafts movement. Very busy in France, Belgium, Germany, Holland, and also Spain. Exuberant styles were developed, great use of material. And in Scotland, the Glasgow School with Charles René Mackintosh, with his own brand of arts and crafts, building and design. At the same time, the bungalow form is growing in popularity as a retreat and for vacation houses. In England, these tended to be more the inexpensive, quickly put up, only used for certain times of the year sort of building. It was a place to get away. It was a retreat. The arts and crafts movement in America came about because, of course, artists, architects, are traveling backwards and forwards to England to gain ideas, Gustav Stickley met with Morris, as did leaders of the Roycroft community in upstate New York, and they came back extremely excited with the philosophy, the ideas, and the designs that they had seen. Stickley began the Craftsman magazine in 1900, and it ran to 1916. And the bungalow really became the focal vehicle, the architectural vehicle for the arts and crafts movement. Of course, many other designs and building types fall under that mantle, but the bungalow has become very tightly grouped with the arts and crafts movement. Stylistically, you can look to the Adirondack style, the Mission, some of the Victorian styles, Oriental architecture, and the Prairie style. All have made their mark on the humble bungalow. On the West Coast, the architects Green and Green, they were brothers, practicing architects, began developing bungalow designs of a very high quality toward the end of the 1800s, right at the turn of the century. And this led to what became known as ultimate bungalows, which are big whoppers, similar to the one that you saw in India. At the same time, California bungalows are really taking hold. I am not sure why California became such a mecca for the bungalow design, but I'm sure it has something to do with both the temperament of the climate and the temperament of the people. But the two blended so well together that people love them. The bungalow design went to all kinds of lengths and turned into different forms, and still parts of Southern California are called bungalow land today. This is an illustration of what is thought to be the first West Coast bungalow that was featured in American Architect and Building News in 1885. It looks slightly odd because, as many buildings are in California, they decided to build it on a hill. And this is the foundation wall that is braced outwards to support the main part of the house. Of course, all of this is open porch, supported on these intricate wooden supports underneath. 1898, this bungalow is in Maine. It was designed for a bungalow, again featured in American Architect and Building News. This seems to have more of a rustic, woodsy feel, probably has a lot to do with the Adirondack style. And here you can see a lattice work of what I would suspect are peeled logs supporting a huge hipped roof with dormers spattered around, with the chimney going up between two of them here of rough stone construction. The main form of the bungalow you can see begins here and extends over to here. This porch, I suspect, went all the way round. This is a postcard view of Green and Green's house for a gentleman whose last name is Gamble, from Procter & Gamble fame, 1908 in Pasadena. Wonderful, rich use of materials, mostly wood, with I believe this is brick, and huge porches supported on columns, widely overhanging eaves, in some ways very similar to some of the prairie-style architecture. Green and Green used a lot of Oriental themes in their houses, and like Wright, they were very enamored by some of the designs that they had seen either on their travels or in publications.
Is Mission style considered largely California?
I'm sorry?
Mission style, is that a mostly California style? Or Western?
Mostly Southwest and Western. Wherever there were Spanish missions, that could be considered a source for the mission style. We have some of those in this presentation. Okay. This is a front elevation showing the building, and the next slide shows what that looks like now. It's owned by, if I'm not mistaken, University of Southern California. Thank you. Who have just finished a tremendous restoration on this building. It's used as guest quarters, academic retreats, perfect place for folks to hang out. One of my professors said that he was invited to stay here overnight, and he couldn't sleep all night. He was just walking around, looking at all the details. And I haven't put one interior slide, which I think is coming up next. I'm wrong, it's here in a minute. But here are the rafter tails sticking out. Of course, in certain climates, those are going to deteriorate much more quickly and are a source of constant maintenance. But some of the details on the exterior are evident where the handrail has these little jogs in them and extend out. And all of the posts supporting are made up out of really wonderful joinery and exposed workmanship. The idea of the arts and crafts was to say the craftsman can produce wonderful things. And this house really goes out and praises the ability of both the designer and the builder. This is the living room. We're looking at an ingle nook, which is a little seating place, fixed built-in seating here and here opposite with a fireplace in between. All of the light fixtures and the furnishings, including, I should say, a piano stool, are in the arts and crafts style. So the essential ingredients for a bungalow is a house with strong horizontal forms. It seems to sit low to the ground. It'll be 1, 1.5, and sometimes 2 stories in height, with projecting roof lines, exposed rafter tails and dormers, at least 1 deep porch, and probably more, and an emphasis on artistic use of common materials wherever that bungalow happens to be. The ideas for bungalows were transported through magazines and publications and advertisements, including the Craftsman magazine that Stickley started, House and Garden, The House Beautiful, and Woman's Weekly. The illustration on the right there, if we could just go back to that for a second, is a once a year, it's an annual edition, a supplement to Woman's Weekly, and in that magazine they had lots of great plans that women would look at and implore their husbands to go and buy them one. Okay. In that magazine, the home edition, there was this tiny little 20 feet by 22 feet bungalow. It has all of the ingredients, although tiny by comparison, a little bit of an overhang and a rafter tail just sticking out here and one at the back and one at the front. That's all you get. Some expression of joinery around the windows. Here you have a 4-pane over a single window, little tiny porch. I thought that was so cute I had to throw it in. An advertisement in House Beautiful, 1908. Direct from Bungalow Land, it says. Perfect gems of home, comfort, and attractiveness. So everyone was suggesting bungalows were the way to go. This has an Oriental influence to it with the upturned ends and the little pinnacle, which is often found on earlier Oriental buildings. Strong use of joinery, exposed joinery in the porch columns, a shed roof with rafter tails, windows grouped, a rusticated stone or brick chimney, and a bump out for the kitchen. notice how clean and clear this is. As we come in, we go up onto the expansive porch into the living room, which is open to the dining room, which has a buffet pass-through to the kitchen. Okay. These rooms are grouped without too much separation. A bedroom, another bedroom, and a bathroom. Very simple, very pleasant design. Take that last plan and make it into a real house, and this is close to what you'd get. Okay, very similar in design. Okay.
I'm trying.
Okay. There. This one took Oriental a few steps further along. When I first saw this, I thought, these look like boat anchors. But it's taking the upswept form of traditional Japanese joinery and taking it to new heights, almost literally. But here you see the exposed rafter tails, the grouping of 3 lights over 1 in the windows, and so forth. Long Island, New York. New York had to do things just a little differently, and here you have a 2-story building with possibly a 3rd story on top. Cantilevered porch that it seems to extend largely around the building with supporting posts at least at each corner. Even the gate has an arts and crafts feel to it. The porch is shielded with an insect screen, and the lower part has a lattice work, probably to prevent dogs, children, and other animals from falling out. This is a beautiful example of a different form of bungalow. Big shed roof with a shed dormer with groupings of 3 awning windows. Very cute little plump columns that are tapered in a typical arts and crafts style, and a very generous entranceway. I'm not sure if that is original, but a very good example of a craftsman style bungalow. There's another one where the roofs seem to escalate back into the building, piled one on top of the other as you go deeper into the house. And you can't help but be invited to walk up the path and sit outside and underneath the shade of the porch roof. My goodness, Helena, Arkansas has bungalows too. This one in a somewhat classical revival style. Hip roof with a hip dormer and classical columns with a wider gap for the automobile to drive up in. And in the next slide, this is the neighbor to this house, which is in the craftsman style. This is immediately next door, but quite a different. They're both bungalows. These knee braces that you see are very typical of detailing. They're practical too, in that you need support for this wide overhanging eave. It's a Mission Revival style bungalow in San Diego. So the timeless appeal of bungalows is that they have an exterior and an interior that's very attractive, very livable. They're inviting, they're informal in appearance, and they really suggest a lifestyle of relaxed living. They have a strong relationship with the outdoors and an intimacy with nature that many other houses don't have. It encourages outdoor living and contact with neighbors from porches and verandas. They're generally inexpensive to build and usually inexpensive to maintain. And they have very strong associations with the past. And it certainly encourages a simple and uncomplicated living style. bungalow, the heyday of the bungalow has passed. This is a new one constructed in a planned community of Laguna West, California in 1990. This particular planned community is part of the new urbanism movement that is gaining hold in the country. The idea is to really plan and think through what the relationships of people living in an area are with the place where they work, with where they shop, rather than being haphazardly thrown together. These buildings are planned with fairly strict guidelines that include the necessity for interaction with your neighbors, porches that encourage being outside rather than closed up.
So you wouldn't run over your flowers in the way driving in?
I'm sure the people that live in this planned community have cars that don't leak oil. I'm sure these flowers are just fine.
What is it that makes that a bungalow still? I mean, why is that a bungalow?
Well, you have a porch that is covered outside. It's simple in design. I wouldn't say there's a lot of craftsmanship evident, but they have used local materials, stucco here. I'm sure we have hardy plank up there. But it is termed a bungalow in this community. And so the idea that bungalows imply a sense of relaxed living is something that they want to promote, not only this house, but the other ones in the community. So the American bungalow really strikes a chord within our souls. And I feel that those things that work well in bungalows are that they give us a feeling of being familiar, being comfortable, and certainly being intimate. And I thought this was a nice slide to end on. It's such a beautiful house and a beautiful photograph. I wanted to end with that slide. If we could go on to the next couple, put in some recommended reading. These are books that I used extensively in researching this. The Bungalow by Teixeira and Keister. It's a beautifully photographed book. And The American Bungalow, 1880 to 1930 by Clay Lancaster. And lastly, and certainly not least, is A Field Guide to American Houses by Virginia and Leon McAllister. A really wonderful and rich book. No color photographs in here, but very well researched and a lot of very sound information in there.
Can we go back to the slide before, so that
Yes.
we can get those written down? Thank you.
This is part of a 3-book series now that has the interior and gardens.
Oh, really? Okay.
The bungalow.
Somebody just told me that this is now part of a 3-book series. The other one addresses the interiors, and the other will address the landscaping. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and I think that's it.
Down there.
I have a question if you have a minute or
Yes.
covering something else. Like, for my house, and I was talking to people, and apparently it happened to others too, they built it without a fireplace at all. Because I guess what I had told is that at that time it was considered old fashioned to have a fireplace if you could have electricity. Is that common or is that just kind of a rarity?
When was the house built?
1902, I think.
Can I put the
Can we
lights
have
back?
the lights up, please?
I mean, if that was just an aberration,
Oh,
or
yeah.
if that was something you heard about, or.
Well, I noticed on some of the plans in here that there were, some of them didn't have a fireplace, so you wondered how they stay warm. I really don't know the answer to your question. I couldn't tell you why. It may have been economics.
Because I know in California, I lived in one there, and all the chimneys, because they would fall down in the earthquakes, they just quit building chimneys, I guess, on a lot of houses. Everything is enforced on. And there, I guess the heat was no big deal.
It's a fairly even temperature.
I have a question about the airplane addition. That was always an addition, an afterthought, right? Or were they ever built? Airplane bungalows?
Well, they were designed that way.
They're designed that way.
Yes. Yeah. They were called an airplane bungalow because they had this little piece stuck up with windows in it, and the roofs tended to flare down in a very shallow way and had little upturned ends. Well, they flared out to almost horizontal, and they reminded people of an airplane, and so they called airplane bungalows.
We have one, and we've argued over whether it was original or not.
Yes, they were designed that way.
Is that different than a camelback? Which is basically a bungalow with a rectangular box stuck on usually on the back third of it that contains a room. Is there a number of
I
those?
think that's different.
Okay.
I think that's different. The style of the airplane bungalows is flowing from beginning to end, from front to back.
Flowing from.
Meaning that the design continues from the front of the house to the back of the house. It's, the principles of the design are not only on one part of the bungalow, they are consistent through the building, on the exterior.
Well, I guess mine is more of a camelback. With a airplane stuck on the back, a tower on it.
Okay. The only way to really find out is to take a look at the building very closely, or try and find original plans that will tell you what was original and what had been added. And usually somebody who's willing to crawl around your house will be able to ascertain if there was an earlier building and then this was a later addition. Also historical photographs, if you can get them. Any other questions?
In California, there's a lot of houses that look like bungalows, but their roofs are curved upwards, especially like in the Hollywood area. Is that still bungalows?
I couldn't tell you, I don't know. You have to understand that bungalows cover a very wide territory. And something that may have been constructed as a bungalow may not be seen as a bungalow today, and vice versa. The building that was just a building has a lot of bungalow features and has become called a bungalow. There are some that are right on the edge, and there are some that are right in the middle of the bungalow category, and there's no question about what they are. But even driving through Helena or driving through Memphis, you're going to see buildings that make you scratch your head and wonder, well, I wonder if it is, or I wonder if it isn't. And probably nobody can tell you. You can make that decision yourself and say, sure. Yes,
most of them are one story.
most of them are one story. Some of them will be a story and a half, so that from one perspective the bungalow might appear to be one, but because of the height of the roof, you can actually fit living space onto a small second floor, usually within the roof structure itself. On rare occasions, they will be 2 stories.
Well, I grew up in Massachusetts, and I don't remember seeing very many bungalows. Most houses are 2 stories. I really hadn't seen 1-story houses until I came here.
Right. Well, predominantly there are more on the West Coast and in Southern California than anywhere else in the country. But in any climate that lends itself to this kind of house, you're going to find people building. Good. Well, thank you very much. You've been a very great. Especially thanks to you, sir, for being my.
Want to make sure that everybody has signed the roll so that we know that you're here. Okay, well, it's still coming your way. If you're through, we'll pass it back. I want to mention the schedule in the coming weeks. We had a shift between 2 of the speakers, We hope that you'll attend all of the sessions, but next week, John Griffin, who writes the regular column in the Flyer, I forget, what's the name of it?
Interior.
Interiors, is it, primarily? And John's going to be focusing on the bungalow. The following week, Susie Askew, landscape architect, is going to be talking about gardens and landscaping related to the period of the Foursquare and the bungalow. And the week after that, Mark Weaver, an architect with Edek Obo, who built a new Foursquare in the redevelopment of the Evergreen Corridor. We'll be talking about the Foursquare and the effort that he went through to try to stay faithful and still meet his family's growing spatial requirements, which one of the issues in the redevelopment of the Evergreen Corridor, I think that will be particularly interesting. Jim Lutz, who is here, will wrap up the series on the fifth Monday with an overview, talking from the architectural critics' perspective, how well the Evergreen Corridor fits in to Evergreen, which I think is an interesting thing to contemplate for all of us, because it's certainly a success from a planning standpoint for us to have rebuilt those 200 homes that were demolished in the mistaken efforts to build an extension of I-40 through Evergreen. But, and so anyway, a great series. And then, do we know anything about the field trip at the end, June?
Linda is working on
The
it.
field trip is unfolding as we sit. So anybody that wants a copy of Good Abode, let me know. And we do have additional copies back there. The Junior League does. I'm not selling them. I get nothing out of it. But it's a great start. And we really appreciate tackling it. I think I saw a hand. Somebody had a question, did they?
I'd just be curious.
Yes.
In here, how many folks here own bungalow or live in bungalows, and how many folks?
How many
live in
bungalows do we
Foursquare?
have? Bungaloids. Wow. All right. How many Foursquares?
Uh-oh, the bungalows have
They must be very livable.
There are very many in Memphis. On behalf of Memphis Heritage and our board of directors, I want to present Simon with a little something for coming and doing this for free. It's just a Memphis Heritage paperweight, and we thank you so much. One of the things I want this group to be thinking about is what you want our series to be next year. So as you leave, there are business cards on the table out here. If you would email me any suggestions you have, we would love to know ahead of time what your interests are and what we can do to help make this class more exciting and exciting next year, because we've obviously had a great response this year. So we've hit a nerve. We just want to find that next nerve. So just keep us posted. I also want to bring your attention, I don't like to be too political, but I would like, you know how preservation starts, you know, constantly have little issues. And one is, obviously, there is a lot of discussion going on with the downtown riverfront development. And if you are aware of it, great. If you're not aware of it, please try to make yourself aware that there are great discussions going on at the present time with the Riverfront Development Corporation plan for the riverfront, which is to build 30 and 40 and 50-story towers on the bluffs. There is a great deal of difficulty in my personal sense of seeing that as being a realistic issue for us and something that we need to address on a personal basis for your own self, however you feel. But take a look at the information out front and go to the Friends for the
Don't you
Riverfront.
think you prejudice the perspective, though, June, when you talk about 30, 40, and 50?
Well, that's what they're telling us. So basically, that's the issue. That's a good idea. Considering that the first plans looked at 3- and 4-story buildings, and then on November 12th, we saw 20, 30, and 50-story towers. It kind of hit us in the face. So.
But they're all bungalows.
But at any rate, please become familiar with it. We're going to need all the support that we can get if it's something that you feel strongly about.
All right. Thank you very much. If you didn't sign up, please get the sheet. bought copies of good of both. We still have some. I say we, the Junior League has some, and they appreciate our selling them for them. So they're still available tonight. I wanted to mention to you a book I just ran across in the library the other day that deals is a Simple Gardens Handbook. It was done by Carl Awesome and Jim Williamson, architects, and it's just a neat thing, and it focuses on a lot of the things that we're talking about here. It describes styles that are either bungalowoid or four square. We were remembering last week. The third thing I wanted to mention just very briefly to you, since some of you may be interested, Tennessee Preservation Trust, which is a fairly new organization, statewide preservation, is having its annual conference in Nashville, April 16th and 17th, and has all the information on its website, which is just TennesseePreservationTrust.org. And if any of you are interested and you forget that, call June.
Or go to our website. That'll connect you right onto it. Welcome, everybody. I know that, as we mentioned last time, it is a cramped quarters, but we're very, very grateful that you're very interested in this class. And we look forward to growing even more, and we promise that we will find a bigger space. And I want to thank Jean and the crew for setting up the furniture for this evening. I also want to thank Roy Ure, who brought furniture this evening for y'all to look at. For those of you who've not been up close and personal with Craftsman and Stickley and that type of wonderful stuff, John's going to touch on it in his interiors. But Roy is a participant in the class, enrolled in the class, and I thought it was a wonderful idea for him to bring some hands-on personal things that you could see. I also have the Memphis Heritage Friends for the Riverfront brochure up here, and we also have new keystones. I want to apologize in public as many times as I can. Jim Williamson's name is misprinted in the keystone. Unfortunately, Jim is one of our mightiest warriors on alternative plans for the riverfront versus what the RDC has come up with. So my apologies in general to the whole architectural community for that. And with no further ado, I want to introduce our speaker for this evening, who's a dear friend and a long contributor to Memphis Heritage, Mr. John Griffin. And I asked John to give me a little brief bio, and he wrote down a few things, and I think they're really wonderful. He was born on a farm in central Virginia that's been in his family since 1820. That's pretty amazing. Educated at William and Mary in colonial Williamsburg, so it's obviously in his blood somewhere. There's that connection. Educated, and then went to Parsons School of Design at the New School in New York. Worked in New York for about 6 years, and then has lived in Memphis for 25 years. And as many of you know, settled in the Greenlaw area and has been a tremendous advocate for its constant revival. Personally, he has revived Greenlaw as far as I'm concerned. He also writes hot properties for the Memphis Flyer, which is that wonderful section that tells you these really unique houses that are on the market. And he is an architectural designer who advises residential and renovations and additions. So without further ado, John Griffin, thank you so much for being here. Thank our dear friend Michael Cromer, who has volunteered to.
It's down front now.
It's in the floor.
It's in the floor, right down front.
There's one seat.
We want you over here.
There's one right here. There's one back.
There's one right here. I'm not going to sit. So anyway, Michael, thank you again for your wonderful talents and videotaping. And I want to thank the Education Committee also for diligently working on this program. Go for it, John.
Good evening, all. I guess a little preview overview. I couldn't contain myself to just interiors. So there's a little exterior. There's a little bit about what I think are important exterior elements that are maybe not attached to the house. And then I finally drug myself back into the interior. So there'll be a little circuitous route tonight. And I also didn't want to stay quite so just purely Craftsman Bungalow, because the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, none of us really throw out the thing our grandmother gave us just because we got to spend a lot of money for a stickly chair. So we're all kind of sort of transitional, which is sort of why this first image shows up. We felt that was sort of a nice little funny, eclectic interior that's got some interesting turn-of-the-century elements, many of which are not bungalow at all. But they've got a very upscale little bungalow light fixture hanging from the ceiling there, and they really couldn't stand the dark woodwork that's so typical of bungalows, so they whitewashed all that fabulous red tone probably. But it's just a great way to remind you that, you know, you haven't got to buy the top-end piece, and you haven't got to make the whole place of one style. We all kind of assemble, and that kind of easy approach to living, I think, is what characterizes bungalows. You know, they weren't really formal. They weren't really painted white with big Greek porticos. They were much more local and casual and asymmetrical and you know, approachable in a different kind of manner, almost like a little hobbit hole, hobbit house kind of place. This is a 1903 bungalow setting down in the Berkeley area, not far off the campus, and you know, it's not the bungalow you find in Memphis, because bungalows always use local materials. So the rock here are probably a little more rounded and rolled creek rock that would come out of a local stream, and the shakes are probably western cedar, and there is some real nice hewn timbers you can just see sticking out that have been sheathed in copper, and you can pick out some of the details of the small pane windows up above the larger, not exactly even equal 1/1 windows. And I think it's a nice early bungalow style piece, and I just happened to be in Berkeley last Friday, so I shot it. And then the next, just around the corner, is classic, the Green and Green brothers. This is they were primarily in Pasadena, but they did this in about 19. When did they do this one? About 19. The first was 1903. This is 1908. It was built for the Thornton family, and it's now a fraternity house, and has been for a very long time, and still is meticulously maintained, both the house and even its landscaping. And the details here that I think are sort of fascinating is sometimes forget those exterior details, like look at that amazing railing, the way they sort of had those bricks come up and form those very wonderful openings. You'll even see it echoed down below in the foundation of the porch itself. And then notice that, you know, even the approach isn't a central approach. You know, it comes up from the left and right sides, very off-center, very rambling through the yard to get you there. And there's a great hanging light fixture just below the roof line, and you can see the copper that crowns the roof. And there'll be a shot later on. You can just barely see the stained glass in the door and the side lights. There's another shot of later on of an interior, not of this house, but it's a green and green, just so you'll call your attention to the fact that those doors and side lights were oftentimes decorated with wonderful art glass. And we have a few more of this house. This is you can see the beginning of the path wandering up from the right just here at the bottom, and even the use of the local conifers coming up the small containers coming up the steps. And you really get a better sense of that, the wonderful stack of the chimney and the great exposed timbers under all the bays and the entrance area. Again, the local shingles, that's a clinker brick, I'm pretty positive, where they've actually fired the brick so long that they've caused them to explode a little bit and deform a little bit, to try to make the whole thing look again more rusticated, more casual, more of the earth. It's that feeling that I think is so appropriate to bungalow. And you can catch here in a couple of the windows the amazing mulligan pattern, where it starts off horizontal and literally steps up as it goes across the window, and I can't imagine how they cut that glass. I think the next slide, there's another one right there, great little detail. The Green and Green brothers like to get Finnish shipbuilders to build their houses, so they really got great carpentry. This is a little side entrance that connects out of the back, and you can see their covered walk and screening, the lattice-like screening. And again, not the screen that we would normally, lattice that we think of here, but a very low horizontal, laying down like lines of the earth, and those large, wide boards on the upper walk that is, again, a beautiful railing detail. I think oftentimes, and I've tried to show some of you'll see tonight, a lot of exterior elements that have at times been lost, porch railings or entrance canopies, things that are so important, I think, to the feeling of the bungalow, and kind of easy to put back, but not necessarily come to mind immediately as a good solution. So I thought we'd look at some of those. And there should be one more shot of a little side window there.
John, did you say Finnish shipbuilding?
Finnish shipbuilders. Why there were Finns who
And they
built
just happened to be
ships
in
in Pasadena, I've never explored. But the Green brothers used to spend their early life on Nantucket, so I mean, obviously folks are getting around, so you know, not that big a deal. This is a little side window going up the side of the house, and I think it's beautiful how they let in those timbers of both of the header above and the sill below, and you see the old weathered cedar shake there very nicely. And yeah, here's one last shot. This is the main entrance, and you can see that wonderful wrought iron little arbor piece that's still strung